Aaliyah was nervous as she stood at the school gate, her fingers clutching the strap of her backpack. She was only 14, but that morning felt heavier than any day before. Her family had just moved to a new town, and everything around her looked strange. The tall buildings, the wide roads, even the trees seemed different. She looked at the big sign above the gate that said Maplewood High School, and she took a deep breath. Inside, groups of students were laughing. Some were taking pictures, others were chatting loudly. Aaliyah felt invisible. No one noticed the small girl with tight curls and a shy smile. She had always been quiet, but in this new school, her silence felt like a wall. She had come from a small city where most people looked like her. Here, she was the only black girl in her class, and the stares followed her like shadows. Her first class was English. She sat at the back and tried to listen. The teacher spoke kindly but quickly, and Aaliyah kept her eyes on her notebook. She loved writing, especially about music at home. Her old piano waited for her. It was old and a little out of tune, but to her it was like a friend when she played. She forgot everything, the noise, the fear, the loneliness. At lunch, she walked to the cafeteria. The room was full of voices and laughter. She looked for a place to sit, but every table seemed full. She finally sat alone near the window, opening her lunchbox quietly. A few girls walked past her, whispering and giggling. Aaliyah heard one of them say, "She's new, right?" And another replied, "Yeah, she's different." Those words were small, but they hurt like a sting. Later that day, she passed by the music room. She stopped when she heard the sound of a piano. Her heart jumped. The melody was simple. Someone was practicing scales. She peeked through the glass and saw a boy playing. The room smelled like polish and sheet music. On the wall were photos of past school performances. Smiling students holding instruments, trophies shining under bright lights. She wished she could be part of that world, but she turned away, thinking, they'd never let me play. At home, Aaliyah's mother asked, "How was your first day, baby?" Aaliyah smiled weakly and said, "It was okay," but inside she felt lonely. Her mother kissed her forehead and said, "Just be yourself. The right people will see you." Her grandmother's old words echoed in her heart too. Don't hide your light just because others don't understand it. That night, Aaliyah sat by her piano, running her fingers over the keys. She started playing a slow tune her grandma had taught her, a gospel song filled with hope and strength. As the melody filled the room, her fear slowly melted away. She thought about school again, about how people looked at her like she didn't belong, and a small spark lit inside her chest. She whispered to herself, "One day, they'll hear me." The next few weeks were hard. Aaliyah tried to fit in. She smiled when others spoke to her, but most times they didn't. She joined the library club and helped teachers carry books. She was polite, quiet, and hardworking, but the feeling of being different followed her everywhere. During music class, the teacher once asked if anyone could play the piano. Aaliyah wanted to raise her hand so badly, but her voice got stuck in her throat. No one looked at her anyway. After class, she stayed behind, her eyes on the piano in the corner. It looked old but beautiful. Black and shining under the light, she touched the keys softly. They felt cold. She pressed one key, and a sweet note filled the empty room. Suddenly, she heard footsteps, and it was the principal walking by. He looked surprised and said, "You play?" Aaliyah froze, her hands shaking. She quickly said, "A little, sir." The principal smiled, but there was something in his tone that made her unsure. "Well, maybe you'll show us one day," he said lightly before walking away. Aaliyah nodded, but inside she wondered if he really meant it. She could feel that he didn't take her seriously, like it was just small talk, but those words stayed in her mind. "Maybe you'll show us one day." She thought about what it would be like to play in front of everyone, to let them see what she could really do. But then she remembered the laughter, the whispers, and she pushed the thought away. One afternoon, while walking home, she passed a group of students practicing for the school talent show. There were singers, dancers, and even a magician. She stood quietly and watched. They seemed so confident, so free. She felt a mix of envy and admiration. She wished she had the courage to join, but something inside her kept saying she wasn't good enough, that no one would listen anyway. When she reached home, her mother was in the kitchen humming. "You're quiet again," she said. Aaliyah smiled and shrugged. "Just tired," she whispered. Her mom placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Don't let this world make you small, baby. You were born to shine." Those words touched her heart deeply, and that night she played again, longer this time, her fingers dancing faster across the keys. her music filling the small apartment with warmth and power. In her mind, she imagined the school assembly hall, rows of students sitting, the piano shining under the spotlight, and her hands moving gracefully across it. She saw faces turning, jaws dropping, hearts listening. She smiled at the image, not knowing that one day it would all come true. That night, when she went to sleep, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She didn't know how or when, but she felt deep down that something big was waiting for her, something that would change everything. The morning sun was soft and golden as Aliyah walked through the school gates. She was starting to feel a little more used to the hallways now, though she still kept her eyes low when she walked past groups of laughing students. Her backpack bounced gently against her shoulder and her earphones played quiet music. The same gospel tune she had practiced the night before. Music was her safety, her secret place, the one thing no one could take from her. When she entered her classroom, the chatter was louder than usual. Students were passing around small flyers printed in bright colors. Aliyah took one from the girl sitting next to her. It read, "Annual Talent Assembly this Friday. Show your talent, share your spark." Her heart skipped a beat. She read it again and again, her fingers trembling slightly. She had always dreamed of performing, but she had never done it outside her church. The teacher walked in with a smile. "All right, everyone. This Friday we're having our talent assembly.
So if you've got something special to share, singing, dancing, magic,
Whatever it is, don't be shy." The class buzzed with excitement. Hands shot up, voices filled the air. "I'm doing a dance routine," said one girl proudly. "We're making a band," shouted another. Everyone seemed confident, certain, bright. Aliyah stayed quiet. She folded the flyer carefully and slipped it into her notebook. Her heart was racing. Could I? She thought. Could I actually play the piano in front of the whole school? But the next thought came fast and cold. No one even knows me, they'll just laugh. She shook her head and tried to focus on her work. But the idea stayed, glowing faintly in the corner of her mind. At lunchtime, she sat in her usual spot by the window. Watching the others form their groups, the cafeteria was alive with energy. People practicing small routines, humming songs, even pretending to hold microphones. Aliyah smiled to herself. She loved seeing people express themselves, but a little sadness tugged at her heart. She wanted to belong in that joy too. As she opened her lunchbox, she heard a few girls from her class talking nearby. "I bet Mr. Jacobs will play the piano again. He loves showing off," one girl said, giggling. Another replied, "Yeah, no one else even knows how to play anyway." Aliyah's hand froze halfway to her sandwich. She looked up slightly, her heart thumping. No one else. She whispered inside, but she didn't say a word aloud. That afternoon, during her break, she wandered near the auditorium. The door was open. Inside, she could hear music. A boy practicing on the drums. A teacher clapping in rhythm. Aliyah watched from the back quietly. She imagined herself there behind the piano, her fingers moving like water over the keys. She could almost feel the lights on her face, but the fear of being laughed at still held her in place. As she turned to leave, she heard a familiar voice. It was the principal, Mr. Howard. He was talking to the music teacher. "We need to keep the show light this year, something fun. Something the kids will laugh and cheer for," he said. The music teacher nodded. "We'll have some good acts, I'm sure. Maybe some surprises too." Aliyah didn't know then that this conversation would later become part of her story, a part she would never forget. The next day, sign-up sheets for the talent assembly were pinned on the notice board. Students crowded around them, writing their names excitedly. Aliyah walked by slowly. She looked at the sheet. Her hand itched to pick up the pen, to write her name under instrumental performance, but her courage failed her again. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Maybe next year," and walked away. Later during music class. Her teacher, Mrs. Clark, asked for volunteers to help set up instruments for the assembly. "We'll need someone responsible to handle the stage piano," she said. Aliyah raised her hand quietly. "I can help," she said softly. Mrs. Clark smiled. "Thank you, Aliyah. I appreciate that." That small moment made Aliyah feel warm inside. Even if she couldn't perform, at least she could be near the music. She would make sure the piano was perfect, clean and tuned. She wanted it to shine even if she wasn't the one playing it. The week moved quickly. Posters for the assembly were everywhere now. Bright, bold letters shouting, "Friday at 11 a.m. Don't miss it." The whole school was buzzing. Aliyah could hear people rehearsing in the halls. The energy was contagious. One night before the event, she sat by her piano again at home. Her mother stood by the door smiling. "You should play for them one day." "Baby," she said. Aaliyah laughed softly. "Maybe one day," she replied. When Friday finally came, the school auditorium was packed. Rows of students, teachers, and parents filled the seats. Colorful lights danced across the stage. Laughter echoed as the host made jokes between acts. Aaliyah stood quietly backstage, making sure everything was ready. Her heart ached a little watching the performers. Every note of music reminded her of what she could have done. As she checked the piano one last time, she ran her fingers gently over the keys. Pressing one note softly, the sound rang clear and beautiful. It made her smile. Little did she know this piano, this very instrument, would soon change everything. The assembly continued, each act earning claps and cheers. Then came a small pause. The host whispered something to the principal, who chuckled and picked up the microphone. "Well," he said with a grin, "while we wait for our next performer to set up, maybe we should have a little fun, How about our piano helper, Miss Aaliyah, gives us a tune?" The crowd laughed lightly, some clapping playfully. Aaliyah froze in place, her stomach twisted. She looked at the principal, unsure if he was joking, but his smile didn't fade. The whole room turned toward her. Her heart began to race, her palms grew sweaty. She felt hundreds of eyes on her. It was supposed to be a harmless joke, something to fill time. No one expected her to actually play. But as Aaliyah stood there, hearing the faint echo of laughter, something stirred deep inside her. A quiet fire she hadn't felt before. And before anyone could stop her, she took a step toward the piano. The room fell silent. The room was so quiet that Aaliyah could hear her own heartbeat. It was pounding like a drum in her ears. She looked at the sea of faces staring at her, some students smiling, some whispering, a few even giggling behind their hands. She felt a rush of heat rise to her cheeks. The stage lights were bright, blinding almost, and she could feel the weight of the principal's grin pressing on her like a dare. She wanted to run, to disappear into the shadows backstage, but something inside her refused to move backward. Her feet felt heavy, but they carried her toward the piano anyway, each step echoing softly across the wooden stage. The laughter dimmed a little, curiosity replacing it. No one really expected her to play. They thought she'd sit there, tap a few random keys, and get off the stage embarrassed. But Aaliyah had other plans, even if she didn't know it yet. When she sat down on the piano bench, her hands trembled slightly. She glanced up and caught sight of Mrs. Clark, her music teacher, standing near the curtains. Mrs. Clark gave her a small nod, a quiet kind of encouragement. That single look told Aaliyah everything she needed to know. It was okay to play. It was okay to be seen. She took a slow breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The smooth surface felt familiar, like the touch of an old friend. She remembered her grandmother's voice in her mind, saying softly, "When the world laughs, baby, let your music answer." And so she pressed the first key. The sound was gentle at first, like a whisper. One soft note floating in the air, then another and another. The laughter in the room died completely. Her fingers began to move faster, finding their rhythm. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story of long nights, of quiet dreams, of feeling unseen but still shining anyway. The melody grew stronger, richer. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm. Her curls bounced under the stage light. Her eyes closed as the music carried her somewhere far beyond that gym. It was as if her soul had stepped out through her fingertips, spilling truth into every chord, every harmony. Students who had been whispering moments ago were now frozen in silence. One of the teachers lowered his phone without realizing it. A boy in the back leaned forward, his mouth open in awe. The sound filled every corner of the hall. Deep, soulful, alive. For the first time since she came to Maplewood High, Aaliyah wasn't the quiet new girl. She was an artist, a storm, a voice without words. Her fingers danced across the keys like they were born for it. Soft one moment, thunderous the next. Every note seemed to say, "I belong here." Mr. Howard, the principal, stood awkwardly near the microphone, the grin slowly fading from his face. He hadn't expected this, no one had. What started as a joke was turning into a performance people would never forget. He looked around, watching the students who moments ago had laughed now sitting in stunned silence. The melody changed, flowing into something deeper. She began playing a song she had written herself, one she had never shown anyone. It was about her grandmother, about moving to a new place, about holding on to light when the world felt cold. The music swelled with emotion, rising and falling like waves. Tears glistened in the eyes of a few teachers. Even Mrs. Clark pressed her hand to her heart. One of the girls who had laughed earlier wiped her cheek quickly, embarrassed by how moved she was, and Aaliyah kept playing. She didn't stop until the very last note faded softly into silence. She opened her eyes slowly, realizing the room was still holding its breath. Then in one powerful second, the silence broke. The whole auditorium exploded into applause. Students stood up, clapping and cheering, their voices echoing against the walls. Some shouted her name. Others whistled and screamed, "Go Alia!" That was amazing. The sound was overwhelming. It wrapped around her like a wave of light. Alia blinked, tears filling her eyes. She smiled for the first time on that stage. A real smile. Proud, strong, full of relief. She stood up and gave a small bow, her hands still shaking. She could hardly believe what had just happened. The principal stepped forward, his face red with surprise and something else, guilt maybe. He cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "Well, that was unexpected and beautiful." The crowd laughed kindly, not mocking now, but genuinely happy. When Alia walked off the stage, Mrs. Clark met her with open arms. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Alia hugged her tight, her heart racing with joy. She looked back one last time at the piano, the instrument that had been both her secret and her strength, and whispered softly under her breath, "Thank you," as she left the stage. Students she barely knew smiled and clapped her on the shoulder. "That was crazy good." One boy said. "You're incredible," said another. She didn't know what to say. She just smiled shyly and nodded, feeling something new growing inside her. Confidence. In the hallway, she heard people talking. "Did you know she could play like that? That was better than any act we've seen before. She's so talented." Their voices followed her like music itself. She felt lighter than air. When she reached the empty classroom, she sat down and took a deep breath. She looked out the window at the bright afternoon sky. Everything felt different now. The school that once seemed cold and distant felt a little warmer, a little kinder. She didn't realize it yet. But that single performance, born from a moment of humiliation, had changed how people saw her, and even more importantly, how she saw herself. When the applause finally softened, Alia stood still for a moment, her heart beating fast like a drum that wouldn't stop. She could still feel the vibration of the last note in her fingertips, the sound echoing softly in her ears. The crowd's cheers had been so loud it almost didn't feel real. She had gone from being invisible to unforgettable in just a few minutes, and the thought made her both proud and a little scared. Backstage, her classmates surrounded her, faces glowing with excitement. "Girl, that was insane." One said, "You just killed it out there." Another shouted. Someone even asked if she gave piano lessons. Alia laughed nervously, not used to all the attention. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but inside, she felt like a spark had been lit. Mrs. Clark walked up and gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "You see, Alia, talent speaks for itself. No one can laugh at something that moves their heart." Her teacher's eyes were filled with pride. Alia nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "I was so scared," she admitted. Mrs. Clark smiled. "That's how you know it mattered," she said, as Alia stepped into the hallway. She saw students she'd never spoken to before smiling at her. Some waved, some whispered her name, and others clapped again just for fun. It felt strange. Yesterday no one even looked at her. Today everyone seemed to know who she was. She didn't know what to do with all that attention, so she just smiled shyly and kept walking. The principal, Mr. Howard, found her later in the corridor, his usual confident tone replaced with something softer. "Alia," he said, "I owe you an apology. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I thought it would be a light moment, but clearly, you turned it into something much more meaningful." Alia blinked, unsure what to say. She could see he was sincere. She nodded and said, "Thank you, sir." And though it was simple, those words carried more grace than he expected. That night at home, Alia told her mother everything. She described how the principal had called her up as a joke, how scared she was at first, and how the music just flowed once she started playing. Her mother listened with tears in her eyes, holding Alia's hand tightly. "You see, baby, sometimes God uses the smallest moments to show the biggest light," she said softly. Alia smiled. "I think he did," she whispered. She spent the next few days walking through school in a kind of daze. People greeted her in the halls. Someone even nicknamed her Piano Girl, which made her laugh. The cafeteria that once felt so lonely now had people calling her to sit with them. She didn't feel invisible anymore, but the change also made her thoughtful. She wondered how quickly people's hearts could turn, how laughter could turn to applause in just one song. In music class, Mrs. Clark asked Aaliyah to help some younger students learn simple chords. At first she hesitated, but when she saw the kids' curious faces, she smiled and agreed as she showed them how to press each key. She remembered her grandmother's hands guiding hers long ago. The thought made her heart warm. Teaching felt good. It felt right. One afternoon, as she was helping to clean the music room, she found a flyer for the City Youth Music Showcase. It was a big event where students from all over the district competed. The winner would get a scholarship to a summer music camp. She stared at the paper for a long time, her heart racing again. She knew she wanted to try, but the fear whispered in her ear once more. What if you're not good enough? What if this time they really do laugh? She took the flyer to Mrs. Clark and asked quietly, "Do you think I could enter this?" Mrs. Clark looked at her, surprised at first, then smiled. "Aaliyah, I don't just think you could, I think you should," she said firmly. "What you did on that stage wasn't luck, it was talent." Pure and honest, those words filled Aaliyah with courage. Like sunlight breaking through clouds, for the next few weeks, Aaliyah practiced every day after school. Her fingers sometimes sore, but her spirit never tired. She wanted her music to tell her story, not just to impress people, but to inspire them. She practiced late into the evenings, her mother often standing in the doorway, smiling quietly, proud beyond words. On the day of the showcase, the auditorium was larger and brighter than her school's. The stage seemed enormous as she waited for her turn. She heard others perform, some with perfect technique, others with flashy showmanship. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, breathing slowly when her name was called. She walked up to the piano with calm confidence. Not the shy girl she used to be, but someone new, someone stronger. When she began to play, the same magic filled the air again. This time she wasn't afraid. The notes poured from her heart like sunlight. Every sound told a piece of her journey, of being underestimated, of finding courage, of standing tall. By the time she finished, the audience was completely silent. Then came the same thunderous applause, and Aaliyah smiled through her tears. She didn't win first place that day, but she won something much bigger. When the judges announced a special award for outstanding expression and original composition, they called her name. The crowd clapped again, and Mrs. Clark hugged her tight afterward. "You found your light, Aaliyah," she whispered. "And now the world sees it too." Walking home that evening, Aaliyah looked at the sunset, the sky painted in orange and gold. She thought about that first day when she was invisible, about how one small act of courage had changed everything. She smiled softly to herself because she knew this was only the beginning of her story. Aaliyah sat by her window that evening, the small golden trophy from the showcase resting beside her. The city lights flickered in the distance like 1,000 tiny stars. She touched the engraved letters gently, tracing her name with her fingertip. She didn't win first place, but it didn't matter, because for the first time in her life she felt seen. Not as the shy new girl, not as someone to laugh at, but as an artist, a musician, someone who had something real to say. At school the next week, things felt different again. This time not just for her, but for everyone around her. People seemed kinder, softer. It was as if her performance had broken something. A wall, a silence, a way of thinking. Her classmates greeted her with smiles. Some even asked her to play during lunch breaks. And though she still felt shy, she said yes, because the music inside her was too big to hide anymore. One afternoon, she sat at the old school piano again, the same one she had played on during that assembly. Her fingers pressed gently against the keys. The notes floated through the air, drawing people in quietly one by one. A small crowd gathered around her. It wasn't a show, it wasn't planned, but somehow it felt more special than any stage. Students who never spoke to each other before stood side by side, listening. No phones, no laughter, just silence and sound. When she finished, a boy from her science class said softly, "I don't even like piano music, but that was beautiful." She smiled. "Thank you," she said. And for once, it didn't feel awkward or strange to accept a compliment. She had learned that when music comes from the heart, people can feel it no matter who they are. Mr. Howard, the principal, began stopping by the music room sometimes, watching her play from the doorway. One day he said, "You've got a gift, Aaliyah. I hope you keep using it." She nodded politely. But inside she knew his words meant more than he realized. It was his careless joke that had pushed her onto that stage in the first place. A moment that changed both of them. Mrs. Clark suggested starting a school music club, and she wanted Aaliyah to help lead it. At first, Aaliyah hesitated. "Me? But I'm not good at leading," she said. Mrs. Clark smiled. You don't have to be loud to lead. You just have to inspire. Those words stayed with Aaliyah, and soon the Maplewood Melody Club was born. The club began small, just 5 students and an old upright piano, but week after week, more joined. Guitar players, singers, drummers, even shy kids who just wanted to listen. Aaliyah taught them simple harmonies and shared how to play with feeling. Not just technique, she told them. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest, and they listened, they really listened as the weeks passed. The sound of music began to fill the hallways after school. Laughter mixed with rhythm, and the school that once felt cold began to hum with energy. Aaliyah could feel the change everywhere. Even teachers began stopping to listen when they passed by. Then one afternoon, the principal called her into his office. Aaliyah felt nervous, wondering if something was wrong. But when she walked in, she saw a small poster on his desk. District School Showcase, looking for student performers to represent Maplewood High. Mr. Howard smiled and said, "I'd like you and your music club to perform this year." Aaliyah's eyes widened. "Us? The whole club?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, I think you'll make us proud." The news spread fast. Everyone in the club was excited. They decided to perform a mix of instruments, piano, drums, and vocals, all built around a song Aaliyah had written herself. She called it The Light Inside. It was a song about finding courage, about turning pain into something beautiful. Every note came from her story, from that moment when she had faced laughter and turned it into applause. Rehearsals were tough, sometimes students argued. Sometimes things went wrong, but Aaliyah learned to guide them with patience. When someone got frustrated, she'd smile and say, "Don't worry, just feel it," and somehow it always came together again. The night of the district showcase arrived. The stage lights were brighter than anything Aaliyah had seen before. The auditorium was packed with hundreds of people, teachers, parents, students from other schools. The noise backstage was loud, full of nervous laughter and quick footsteps. But when Aaliyah sat down at the piano, everything went quiet inside her. She looked at her friends, the same kids who once didn't even notice her, now standing beside her as a team. She nodded to them. Then her fingers touched the keys. The first note rang out like a promise. The drums joined, then the voices. The sound rose like a wave, full of power and emotion. The audience leaned forward, drawn in. Aaliyah's music carried not just melody, but meaning. It spoke of second chances, of kindness, of finding strength where no one expected it. And when the final chord echoed through the hall, the silence that followed was electric. Then once again, applause filled the room louder than before. People stood to their feet, cheering for them, cheering for her. Tears rolled down Aaliyah's cheeks as she smiled. Her friends hugged her tightly, and even the principal, standing in the front row, clapped with pride. After the show, a music director from another school approached Mrs. Clark and said, "That girl, the pianist, she plays with heart. She could go far." Aaliyah overheard the words, and her heart swelled. She didn't know what far meant yet, but she knew she was ready to find out. As the night ended, she stood outside under the stars. The cool air brushing against her face, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Grandma, you were right, music does speak." And for the first time, she realized it didn't just speak to others, it spoke back to her too, reminding her that no matter where she went, her light would always shine through her music. When Aaliyah woke up the next morning, it took her a few seconds to remember why her heart felt so full. Then she saw the small golden ribbon from the showcase lying on her desk, the memory of the applause still ringing softly in her mind. She smiled to herself, the sound of clapping, the faces lit with joy, the way her hands had trembled on the keys. It all came back like a dream she never wanted to end. Downstairs, her mother was already in the kitchen, humming one of the songs Aaliyah had played the night before. "You were amazing, baby," she said, turning with a wide grin. "They loved you." Aaliyah hugged her tightly. "It didn't feel like they were just listening to me," she said quietly. "It felt like they were feeling it too." Her mother nodded. "That's when you know it's real," she replied. When she reached school that day, something magical happened. Everyone seemed different. Students she barely knew were smiling at her. Teachers stopped her in the hall to congratulate her. Even the janitor said, "You made that piano sing, young lady." Aaliyah laughed shyly, her cheeks warm with gratitude. She couldn't believe how much things had changed. The same halls that once felt cold now seemed filled with warmth. At lunch, she sat at a table surrounded by friends. Friends who hadn't existed a few months ago. They talked and laughed, planning new songs. New performances, someone even said. We should start posting our music online. And suddenly, it felt possible, everything felt possible. But later that afternoon, as Aaliyah walked past the auditorium, she heard the soft echo of the piano. She paused, peeking through the door. A younger student was sitting on the bench, hesitating, pressing random keys nervously. Aaliyah smiled and walked in. You play? She asked gently. The little girl looked up, startled. I'm trying to, she said, but I don't think I'm any good. Aaliyah sat beside her, her voice soft but steady. You know, I used to think the same thing. I was scared to play in front of anyone, then one day I just did it. And everything changed. The girl looked at her curiously. Was that you at the assembly? She asked, her eyes wide. The one everyone talks about. Aaliyah laughed. Yeah, that was me, she said, and trust me. I was terrified. They sat together for a while, playing simple notes, laughing when they hit the wrong ones. And as Aaliyah watched the girl's confidence grow, she realized something new. Her gift wasn't just for herself anymore. It was meant to help others find theirs too. Her music had already changed her school, but now she could use it to change people's hearts one by one. A few weeks later, Mrs. Clark announced that the school wanted to hold a spring music gala. It would feature students from all grades performing, with Aaliyah leading the final act. You'll play a solo, Mrs. Clark said. Something that represents everything you've learned this year. Aaliyah nodded slowly, her heart beating fast again. She wanted to make it perfect, not fancy or showy, just honest. At home, she spent hours composing, sometimes sitting at the piano until midnight. Her mother would peek in and whisper, Go to sleep, baby. But Aaliyah would smile and say, Just one more try. She wanted every note to carry truth, the fear, the laughter, the strength, the forgiveness. She wanted it to sound like her story. The night of the gala arrived with soft rain outside. The auditorium smelled of fresh flowers and shining wood. The seats filled quickly, parents and teachers chatting in low voices when the lights dimmed. Aaliyah felt that familiar nervous flutter in her chest, but this time it didn't scare her. It excited her. It meant she was alive. She walked to the stage quietly, wearing a simple blue dress and a small silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes for a second, and took a deep breath. In that moment, the noise of the crowd faded. All she could hear was her heartbeat and the whisper of the rain outside. Then, her fingers began to move. The first few notes fell like raindrops. Soft, slow, and tender, the melody grew, telling a story without words. Her story. The sound of finding courage and laughter. The echo of her grandmother's voice. The warmth of her mother's hugs. The strength she found in silence. It was all there, wrapped in music. People in the audience leaned forward, mesmerized. The same principal who once joked about her now watched with tears in his eyes. He realized how wrong he had been, how his careless moment had sparked something extraordinary. Beside him, Mrs. Clark smiled proudly, knowing that what she was hearing wasn't just talent. It was transformation. The song ended softly, the final chord hanging in the air like a breath that no one wanted to let go. For a few seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. Then came the applause, gentle at first, then louder, until the whole room stood again, clapping, cheering, crying. It wasn't just for the music, it was for the journey, for everything Aaliyah had overcome to get to that moment, when she stood and bowed. Her eyes met the faces of people who had once doubted her, now filled with admiration, and she understood something she had never realized before. Her music wasn't just about her voice. It was about their hearts too. She had reached them, healed them, inspired them. After the show, the little girl she had helped weeks ago ran up to her, hugging her tightly. I want to play like you one day, she said. Aaliyah smiled, kneeling down. You will, she whispered. Just don't be afraid of the silence. That's where the music begins. That night, lying in bed, Aaliyah replayed the evening in her mind. The lights, the faces, the sound of rain. And she realized something even deeper. Music had given her a voice, but it had also taught her to listen, to feel, to understand. It had made her brave, not just on the piano, but in life. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought of her grandmother again, and whispered softly, I finally understand. The music doesn't just speak for me, it speaks through me. And outside, the rain kept falling soft and steady, like a rhythm that would never fade. The morning after the gala felt different. The air itself seemed lighter. The sun poured through the curtains like golden paint across Aaliyah's room. She sat up slowly, still half in the dream of last night's music. her fingers moving over the blanket as if they were still touching the piano keys. She smiled to herself, remembering the crowd's faces, the way people stood, clapped, and cried. It didn't feel like a dream anymore, it felt like a beginning. At school, the whispers started before she even stepped inside, but this time they weren't cruel or mocking. They were full of wonder, admiration, respect. "That's her," someone said softly. "That's Aaliyah, the girl who played last night." Others nodded, their eyes warm. She felt shy, but her heart lifted with quiet pride. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was someone people looked up to. When she entered the music room, Mrs. Clark was already there. Arranging sheet music, she turned, smiling widely. "You did something incredible, Aaliyah," she said. "Last night wasn't just music, it was healing." "I could feel it," Aaliyah blushed. "I just played from my heart," she said softly. Mrs. Clark nodded. "And that's why it worked." Soon, the principal, Mr. Howard, called her to his office again. Aaliyah's stomach turned nervously as she walked down the hall. But when she entered, his expression was completely different from before. He stood up, reached out his hand, and said, "Aaliyah, I owe you more than an apology this time." She looked surprised. He continued, "You taught this school something I couldn't have taught with 100 speeches. You reminded us that every student, no matter who they are, deserves to be heard." Aaliyah didn't know what to say. She smiled, shaking his hand gently. "Thank you, sir," she said. "That means a lot." He nodded. "We're planning to create a new tradition, an annual student showcase in your honor. A chance for every voice to shine." Her eyes widened. "Really?" she asked. He smiled. "Really, we're calling it the Harmony Project." News of the project spread quickly, and soon the whole school was buzzing with excitement. Even students who had never touched an instrument wanted to join. They wanted to sing, to dance, to share something of their own. And Aaliyah found herself right in the middle of it all, helping, guiding, encouraging. She wasn't just a performer anymore, she was a leader. During lunch breaks, she helped students practice, sometimes sitting at the piano surrounded by kids trying to sing in tune, other times clapping in rhythm to keep them together. She laughed often now, the sound of her laughter like music itself, and wherever she went, people smiled. But what touched her the most was how things changed between her and the students who had once laughed at her. One day, as she walked through the hallway, a group of girls stopped her. The same ones who had giggled behind her back that first week. The one in front spoke quietly. "Hey, Aaliyah," she said. "We just wanted to say we're sorry for how we treated you before." Another added, "You didn't deserve that, you're amazing." Aaliyah looked at them, her heart soft, and she said gently, "Thank you. I forgive you." And she meant it because she had learned that forgiveness was a song too. Soft, healing, and powerful. As months passed, Aaliyah's story began to spread beyond the school. A local newspaper came to do an interview. They wrote about how a girl who was once mocked had changed an entire school through her music. The headline read, "From Silence to Symphony, a student who changed everything." When Aaliyah saw the article, she smiled shyly, showing it to her mother. Her mom hugged her and said, "See, baby, your music is reaching places your feet haven't even walked yet." One day, she was invited to play at a community event, a charity concert to raise funds for underprivileged students. She agreed without hesitation, saying, "If my music can help someone else, I'll play anywhere." When she sat at that stage, surrounded by people from all walks of life, she felt the same calm she always did when she touched the keys. And when she began to play, the crowd went silent. It didn't matter who they were, rich or poor, young or old, they all felt something real. After the performance, a woman came up to her, tears in her eyes. "My daughter has been too scared to join music class because of what people might think," she said. "But after hearing you, I know she'll be brave." Aaliyah smiled, her voice trembling. "Tell her to play anyway," she said. "The world needs her song too." Back at school, the Harmony Project finally took place. The stage was decorated with lights and flowers, and a banner read, "Let every voice be heard." Aaliyah stood at the side, watching students she had helped perform their songs and dances. Some were nervous, some made mistakes, but every single one of them was shining. She realized then that her greatest performance wasn't just about her own piano. It was about creating a space where others could be brave too. At the end of the event, Mr. Howard took the stage and said, "This program exists because one student turned a moment of laughter into a lesson in courage." He gestured toward her. "Aaliyah, would you join us?" The crowd clapped and she walked to the stage. Her heart full, she didn't play this time. She just stood there smiling as everyone cheered. That night, as she walked home under a sky full of stars, Aliyah thought about how far she had come. From the quiet girl sitting alone at lunch to the one whose music had built a bridge between people, she realized something powerful. Respect wasn't something you asked for. It was something you earned by staying true to who you are, by being kind when others aren't, by believing even when no one else does. She looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "Thank you, Grandma, for teaching me how to listen before I play." Her voice melted into the night air like a melody, and in that moment, Aliyah knew that her journey was far from over. Her music would keep growing, keep teaching, keep healing, because the world still needed songs like hers. Songs born from courage, not comfort from pain, not pride from truth, not noise. Years passed like pages turning in a beautiful book. Seasons came and went, and the halls of Maplewood High changed. New faces, new laughter, new dreams. But one thing remained. The story of a girl who turned a moment of mockery into music that healed hearts. Her name still whispered through the classrooms like a song that never really ended. Aliyah had grown now, her curls longer, her eyes still full of the same quiet fire. She had graduated and gone on to study music at a university far from home, yet she never forgot where her melody had begun. In that small school auditorium under bright lights, when fear turned into courage and silence turned into applause. At university, her talent blossomed even more. She played not just to impress but to inspire. Her professors admired her not only for her skill but for her soul, they said. "When you play, it feels like you're talking to us without words," and Aliyah would smile, because that was exactly what she wanted. She wanted people to feel, to remember, to hope. During her final year, she started teaching part-time at a community center, helping kids from different backgrounds learn piano. Some were shy like she once was, afraid to make mistakes. Others came from broken homes, using music as their escape. Every time she saw their small hands struggle on the keys, she saw her younger self again, the one who once trembled under bright lights one afternoon. A little boy named Malik stayed after class. He looked up at her and said, "Miss Aliyah, people make fun of me at school because I like piano. They say it's not cool." She smiled gently, kneeling beside him. "Let me tell you something," she said softly. "Once, someone made a joke about me playing piano too. They laughed, but when I started playing, they listened, and by the time I finished, they clapped. You know why?" Malik shook his head, and she said, "Because when you play from your heart, you don't just make sound, you make people feel. And that's the coolest thing in the world." He smiled, shy but proud. And Aliyah knew in that moment that her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every kid who had ever felt small, unseen or underestimated back in her hometown. Maplewood High had changed. The school had grown brighter. The walls were filled with murals and music notes. And every year, students looked forward to the Harmony Project, the showcase that Aliyah had unknowingly inspired. At the heart of the auditorium stood a framed picture, a young girl sitting at the piano, her face calm and brave under the spotlight. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "Let your music speak," in honor of Aliyah Thompson. When Aliyah visited one spring afternoon, she walked through those halls again, nostalgia washing over her. She ran her fingers across the lockers, remembering the first day she walked in scared and silent. She peeked into the music room and froze. There was a girl sitting at the piano, her back straight, her fingers trembling over the keys. Aliyah smiled softly. She knew that nervous energy too well. She stepped closer and said gently, "You play beautifully." The girl turned. Startled, "I'm not that good," she said. Aliyah chuckled. "Neither was I once, but I learned something. It's not about being perfect. It's about being brave." The girl looked curious. "Are you her the one in the picture?" Aliyah laughed. "Yeah, that's me," she said. But that was a long time ago. They talked for a while. The girl explaining how the Harmony Project made her want to play piano, how every year students told the story of the girl who changed the school. "They say you taught everyone to listen differently," the girl said. Smiling shyly, Aliyah's eyes softened. "Maybe I just helped them remember what listening really means," she replied. When the girl started to play again, Aliyah stood by the door. The melody was soft but full of feeling. It reminded her of herself, nervous but determined. She whispered quietly, "Play from your heart. That's where the real music lives, outside." As she walked across the schoolyard, the afternoon sun bathed everything in gold. Children's laughter echoed from the distance, and the sound of piano notes floated through the window behind her. She stopped and looked back, smiling to herself, knowing the music would keep going long after she left. A few years later, Aaliyah opened her own music academy. She named it Keys of Light, a place where children of every background could come, learn, and dream. She didn't care if they could afford fancy lessons or not. What mattered was passion. Inside the studio, the walls were covered with photos of her students performing. Smiling, shining, on one wall, hung a single framed quote in gold letters. Music doesn't judge. It connects. Her academy soon became a haven for kids who needed a voice. Every recital ended the same way, with her students playing a song she had written years ago. The light inside it had become more than just her signature song. It was a promise, a reminder that courage could turn pain into beauty, that respect could be earned through kindness, and that even one small act of bravery could echo forever. One evening, after the recital ended and the last student had gone home, Aaliyah sat alone at the grand piano. She pressed a single key. The sound lingered softly. She closed her eyes and smiled. The room felt alive with memories, she whispered. Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to everyone, her mother, her grandmother, her teachers, her students, even the laughter that once hurt her, because all of it had shaped her into who she was. As the last note faded into silence, Aaliyah looked up at the empty seats, imagining the faces of all the people her music had touched. She realized something she had known all along but could finally say out loud. The music was never just mine, she whispered. It was a gift to share. She stood, turned off the lights, and walked toward the door, the piano still glowing faintly under the moonlight through the window. Behind her, the echo of that one soft note filled the air. Gentle, pure, eternal, like her story, still speaking, still inspiring, still reminding the world that true music never ends. It simply keeps finding new hearts to play in,